So the plan was to do the ADA MP1 next. That was until I was thinking about it, and I realized there's no power amp simulations in Helix. Until now. So as I just mentioned, the plan was for me tonight to make another tone match video about another 90s rack preamp. But I got to thinking about it, and there's no power amp sim in Helix. So for me to make these videos and people not be able to have some kind of power amp sort of didn't make a lot of sense. So I decided to go down the rabbit hole of seeing if I could make something in Helix that behaved like a power amp. I ran into a ton of roadblocks. This video was a long time coming because there was a lot. I got frustrated. I stopped for a week and then went back to it. It's been a bit of a long, rocky road. But I finally got somewhere where I think I have something that I like, and it sounds pretty good. And it sounds not exactly like the power amp I modeled it after, but if you were given this as a power amp, you wouldn't be necessarily upset with it. It doesn't sound exactly like the Plexi I modeled it after. But it's really close, and it's really good. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to take a deep dive into what power amps do and how they behave, and then we're going to see what we have to do to replicate that in the Helix. We're going to spend most of the evening on my Spectrum Analyzer looking at what they do. All right, so what we're going to do first is I want to take a look at the amp we modeled this after. Now this is Bias Amp 2, and basically what I did here is this is a 50 watt Plexi, and I took everything out of the signal path. So there's no preamp, there's no EQ, there's no tone stack, there's no cab, there's no post EQ, and there's no amp match block. So everything in here is just a power amp and the transformer block, and that's it. So just the power amp components. And what we're going to do first is I want to take a look at what happens when we send a signal into a power amp. So we're sending a 500 hertz signal in here at minus 18 dB, which is about instrument level. And what we get here is this is a 500 hertz test tone to sine wave, and we have our first harmonic at 1K and our second harmonic at 1500, and then we have our third harmonic at 2K, and 2500, and 3K, and 3500, like that. So fundamental frequency, or first harmonic, second harmonic, third harmonic, fourth harmonic, fifth harmonic. This amplifier is a push-pull amplifier. What that means is it has a phase inverter, and it has two output tubes, in this case two EL34s, and they work opposite one another. So basically the phase inverter takes a signal and splits it, and the positive half of the sine wave goes to one tube, and the negative half of the sine wave goes to the other tube, and then those two tubes work in concert and drive the power transformer back and forth. One pushes and one pulls, and then it reverses. A function, a characteristic of these amplifiers is that they suppress the even order harmonics, which is why we see the fundamental frequency and the suppressed second, a loud third, a suppressed fourth, and a loud fifth. And that's a standard function of how these amps perform. So one of the challenges doing this was I had to look into Helix and see what I could find that would do this. And I spent a lot of time looking at a lot of different blocks, and we'll take a quick glance at a couple of them right here. But for right now, this is just that amplifier, and this is the harmonic footprint that it produces. So when it gets a signal and it starts to distort, it starts to produce harmonics. If we take this input signal and we bring this way down, let's say bring it down to minus 40, you see how clean this is now. It's just giving us the fundamental frequency, and all these harmonics are almost completely gone because the amp is no longer being pushed into distortion. When an amp gets pushed into distortion is when all those harmonics come up. If we take it and we conversely bring it up to like -5 or something, -4, you can see how many harmonics come up, and you can also continue to see the suppressed even order harmonics. So again, this is a characteristic of a push-pull amplifier. All right, so we're going to turn this off, and what I'm going to do is we're going to slide over to this one here. This is a different block. Now what we have here is we have the amplifier that I created. This is the block of that. But first thing, before we test that amplifier, we're going to throw a block in here, and this is going to be a preamp. And what we're going to use is the tube microphone preamp, the studio tube preamp. And the reason I'm using this is because I spent a lot of time trying to get this block to work. Ultimately I failed, and I'm going to kind of show you what this is about. So is this on? This is on. Let me bring the level. Oh, we're at the way high signal. Let's bring the signal way down, back to -18 dB where we were testing everything. All right. So here at -18 dB, we can see this thing is very clean. We have the fundamental frequency, and we have the second harmonic. So we have 500 hertz and then 1K. But that's pretty much all we have. Now, as we take this amplifier, what I'm going to do is it's not level matched, so we're going to take the level up till we get about equal -18 dB there. See the other harmonics go up a bit, but now as I bring the gain up on this preamp, watch what happens. Okay, now our second harmonic is the loudest. As we bring it up more, we can see the other ones catch up and even sort of surpass, and the second one gets suppressed, but the third one's loud, the fourth one's loud, and it's not consistent. Additionally, if we look, so I have a suppressed second, a loud third, but I also have a loud fourth, and this is sort of linear, whereas the other one was kind of up and down. Bring it back down a little bit, and we see it's it's not at all behaving like the other amplifier was. We also see a lot more harmonics up in this upper range here. This ends up being like a lot of noise, and it makes it sound kind of trashy and muddy and not clear. So I fought with this for a while and ended up not using this model. I literally went through pretty much just about every block in Helix doing this. I tried compressors, I tried bass amps, I tried pretty much everything I could get my hands on. And the only thing that I found that did a good job at this, and we're going to eliminate this preamp now, so we're back to just the test tone, and I found this, and this is the tone sovereign. Not the tone sovereign, the heir apparent half of the tone sovereign. So what we have here is we have basically a distortion pedal, but what this distortion pedal does is very interesting, is it suppresses, it actually eliminates all of the even order harmonics. They're gone. They're not even there. When I looked at other power amp simulations, this is very similar to the two notes ones. The two notes are very similar in that they almost completely eliminate the even order harmonics. It does sound a little different. It sounds a little more open and a little more clear, not quite as rich with the harmonic information, but it does get us a lot closer than one of those other amplifier models that just kind of muddy up everything in the upper register. So I went with this model. Now what we're going to do now, let's stop here, is we're going to take a quick peek at what these things look like on the EQ. So over here I have, let's just go back to this patch here. All right, so this again, we're back to the bias amp model, and what we're going to do is we're just going to do a quick sine wave sweep through the audio spectrum. Okay, we get an EQ curve here. This is the EQ curve of our amplifier. We're going to bring this to be a little better resolution. Not quite that much. All right. So this is the EQ curve of the amplifier that we're trying to emulate. We're going to save this in memory slot number 1. It's going to appear green from now on. So now what we're going to do next is we're going to switch back to our Helix model, and I'm going to turn on just that heir apparent, and let's do the same test. And if I do the same test, You can see I have this curve, and it's not as loud. It's also not shaped even remotely similar in the EQ. So what I liked to do was to bring this thing up to line up the lower end here, and that would bring the upper end somewhere up in this register, and then I was going to trim out the middle because this has a hump and this has a cut. So the way I did that was I added this block here. Now this is the block I added was a multi-band compressor. I'm using a multi-band compressor, and the reason I used the compressor was because using that compressor enabled me to do two things. One thing power amps do is create harmonics. Another thing they do is they compress. They compress your signal, they decrease your dynamics, and that creates a certain type of feel. And so by using the multi-band compressor, I was able to kill kind of two birds with one stone. I was able to create some compression in the model, which the distortion pedal already had a good bit. But I was able to just control those dynamics, and I was able to do some EQing, and then I was able to finish it off with just the one EQ block at the end. So as we can see here now, we have a pretty close EQ curve. It's not exact, but let's just remember that everything down this end down here and everything up in here is very poorly replicated by guitar speakers. Guitar speakers stink at anything over 5K and anything below like 80 hertz. They're horrible at it. So when we add a speaker to this, those discrepancies are going to be almost inaudible. And this is how I basically did this. The hardest part really of this whole thing was getting those harmonics correct. If we want to do one more thing here, let's take a quick look. And this is where the models differ. And it's one thing that I really can't get rid of, because when you EQ something heavily like we're doing with this, you end up distorting the waveform. So here is our Helix model, and as you can see, it's not a really nice round sine wave. This is at 500 hertz. It's not horrible. It's clearly compressed. It's clearly somewhat distorted, and it's kind of pointy. It's like a sawtooth, right? If we come down to 100 hertz, up to thereabouts, 125, we're very much a sine wave. And if we go up to 1K, 1100 hertz, we can see we're very pointy, we're kind of jagged here. And a lot of this is being caused by the EQing. Now if I go back to the bias one, you can see our waves are much smoother. Come down to 500, and again, very much, they're not exactly sine wave, they're sort of compressed, they're very rounded, kind of sausages, you know. And then we go down to here, and here we're very much a sine wave at 150 hertz or so. So my experience tells me that more important than the shape of the wave is getting your EQing right, and in the case of a power amp, having messed with this as much as I have, those harmonics are really critical. So I elected to go with the harmonics and getting the EQ close, and that enabled me to get something that was pretty decent. So right now, let's just go ahead and take a listen to this. Well, there you have it. That's my EL34 power amp sim for the Helix. Is it perfect? No, but it's about the best I could do with what I have available. I hope you all enjoyed that. If you did, please press like and subscribe. The link to this patch is going to be on Custom Tone, and I will put the link to it down below in the description. And I'd love to hear what y'all think of it. So that's it for now. Y'all have a good evening.